In order to complete your extra credit packet, you will need to proceed through a series of 3 lessons. The first is linear graphs. You can see the notes page on the left side of my screen. You will be given equations in standard form, such as this equation, 5x plus 2y equals 20. Then you will need to convert them to y-intercept form. All that means is solve the equation for y. Get the y all by itself. You can see how they've done that in step number 1. The equation is now negative 5/2 x plus 10. So let's put that into our graphing calculator. If you'll go to the top left-hand corner of your graphing calculator, you'll see the button y equals. Go ahead and push that. Now you have choices. We don't need all these choices, so we're just going to take our equation and put it into the first line. If you would like to use the fraction bar, you can access it by pushing the buttons alpha, y equals, enter. Now you can put negative 5 in the numerator. Make sure that you use the negative sign that's at the bottom of the calculator. Use the down arrow to go to the denominator where you can enter 2, and then use the right arrow to get out of the fraction so that you can enter x plus 10. Now you're ready to graph. If you'll go to the top right-hand corner of your graphing calculator, you'll see the button that says Graph. Go ahead and push that. The window that we're looking at right now is what we call a standard view. It is set up as a 10 by 10 window. This is perfectly fine for linear graphs. In the future, we may have to adjust our window in order to see our graph better. If you ever need to make an adjustment to your window, you can use the button at the top of your calculator that says Window. You can see right now what the settings are. The x-axis goes from negative 10 to positive 10, and the y-axis goes from negative 10 to positive 10. You can adjust any of these numbers to make one of your axes longer or shorter if needed. Now let's go back to the graph, and we'll move on to step number 3. In step 3, we're going to confirm the y-intercept. We've learned in previous lessons that we can find the y-intercept when x is equal to 0. So in the calculator, we're going to use a function that is found right above the trace button. You can access it by doing second trace. This is the calculate menu. Since we want to enter a value for x, we're going to choose option number 1. Now we can enter that x is equal to 0. Once you select 0, you can push the enter button, and now you know what y is equal to. Our y-intercept is located at 0, 10. Now let's move on to step number 4. We're going to find the x-intercept. If you remember, the x-intercept occurs when the graph crosses the x-axis. We can see that our graph only crosses the x-axis one time. This is the solution to this function. There's a couple different ways that you can name this solution. You can call it the solution. You could also call it the root of the function. And the third and final thing you could say is that it is the 0 of the function. It is the 0 because y is equal to 0 at this point. In order to use the calculator to find the x-intercept, we have to remember that word, 0. We're going to use the second trace menu again. But this time, we'll go down to number 2, 0. It's going to give us some instructions about how to find this point. The calculator says left bound. That simply means that you need to move your cursor close to the point, but stay on the left-hand side. When you get close, you can go ahead and hit enter. Now the calculator says right bound. Continue to move the cursor past your point so that you're on the right-hand side of that point. Hit enter. Now the calculator says guess. You do not need to move the cursor anymore. Just simply hit enter one more time. Once you do that, it will jump to this point of intersection and it will give you the values at the bottom of your screen. This point is located at 4, 0. You can use this menu to actually find any point that you want to on your graph. All you have to do is choose a value for x, plug it in, and you can find the value of y. So let's try one more. Go back to second trace. We're going to choose number 1, and we're going to select a value for x. You can see in step number 5, they chose the value 7, so we'll do that too. When we put in x equals 7 and we hit enter, we get -15/2. You might notice that on their screen it says -7.5. The reason that my screen is displaying the answer as a fraction is because I actually entered my function using the fraction bar. Now let's look at the final step, step 6. Let's view the table for this graph. The table is a great place to find several different x values and y values on this particular graph. You can access the table by going to Second and then Graph. This particular table is starting at the value -3 for x. If you need to see other values of x, you can use your up and down arrows to move up and down the table. Every single one of these x values is paired with a y value, and each of these represents a point that is on our graph. So now let's look at your assignment. You're supposed to complete this practice sheet to go along with what we just learned. You'll notice each of the equations are given to you in standard form, so the very first thing you should do is rewrite them in slope-intercept form. All that means is set them equal to y. Once you've done that, you can plug them into your calculator. I would use the table feature, as you can see here, to fill out the table information in this middle portion. You can also use these points to put onto your graph and to sketch. Then you're supposed to identify 3 things. You're supposed to tell whether or not the slope is negative or if it's positive. Since each of these are linear graphs, a negative slope will be a line that is going down from left to right. A positive slope will be a line that is climbing from left to right. To find your y-intercept, you'll want to use that value menu. You'll plug x equals 0 into your calculator and it will tell you where the y-intercept is. In order to find your x-intercept, you're going to want to use the 0 menu. To find the 0, remember, you're going to need to put your cursor on the left, then put your cursor on the right, and then guess by hitting enter.